Um, now, I know these are really difficult. That's why there's drama in relationships, right? They're hard things to talk about, and I think what's so important is nobody's boundaries are going to be the same in relationships. No one can say, well, you need to do this for your parents, or you need to do that with them. And so I think that the idea, hopefully, is that we're just sharing different ideas. And I think the key part about boundaries is figuring out what yours are. And knowing, and again, that kind of, if it feels like this works for me and it may be challenging, but this is what I choose to do, then those are choices that everyone has to make for themselves. I think the big part, for me, is helping us to kind of recognize when there's just something so difficult inside internally because of it, and we're wrestling and sometimes making ourselves sick or exhausted over it, and doing the same thing over and over again with nothing changing is where it can really begin to impact your own mental health. And so I think hopefully this is helping us just think through, do I need one or not? And even though that feels scary, is that something we can kind of practice? And so this last session, we're going to talk about what are some ways that we cultivate, like Nancy brought up, the connection, so we know kind of how to kind of put some boundaries in when things are creating drama and pain, but what do we do to hopefully try to not need those boundaries? How do we connect in ways that feel like they create that seen and heard and valued place that we want to create in our relationships? And then at the end, it's up to you guys. I like that we've been able to have lots of interaction and questions, and sometimes it's nice because someone might ask a question and it's what somebody else needed to hear. But I also had thought about giving you guys some time to just interact at your own tables, kind of practicing some of that with each other. So I think if we have time, I'd like to try to do that at the end and kind of put into practice, and even maybe role play, between the two of you, a difficult situation with a family member, and practice putting in some boundaries or having some of those conversations. So we'll leave some time at the end for that. So I think this is kind of what I want to start with, in this idea that, again, we talked about being seen and valued and heard. And I just love this. Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable. And I think this idea of really, really hearing someone is so powerful, and yet I think we don't take time to do it a lot of times. I think it's not something that we're not taught how to do it. Often we've grown up in families where listening was not something that was really modeled to us. And so it really is an art, and I think it's a cultivated art, that it takes intentional practice and intentional awareness of what does it mean to listen to someone in such a way that they really feel heard. And so this is just an acronym that helps to kind of point out some key aspects of listening. And so the first obvious one, the L, is to look interested, to show encouragement. And this one I think is so important and difficult, because I think listening takes time. And so often we're listening, yeah, I'm listening, but we're doing something else, or we're kind of scrolling our phone or finishing a quick text message. And the message to our communicator is, I'm not all that important. And so kind of an anecdote about this, when I first started working in the prison, I, for the first while, was trained by some of the other psychologists who'd been there for a while, and I'd sit in and watch their sessions with the different men in prison, and kind of watch where they would say, how are you doing? Fine. Are you going to hurt yourself or somebody else? No. Okay. Have a good week. See you next week. And it just became, they knew, the men knew they had to show up, the psychologists knew they had to write the report, and that was it. And one of the first sessions that I had with someone on my own, and we're in a small, they go through a guard desk to get there, but I'm alone in this small room with the man sitting on the other side of the desk from me. And one of the first men was bald with tattoos of devil horns on his head, tattooed so covered head to toe. And I'm new at this and not very familiar with this population, and just really feeling nervous, and how am I going to connect? And I don't understand their world. And I'll never forget the first asking him, how are you? And looking at it, and probably part of why I was peering so deeply into his eyes is because that was the only part that wasn't covered with stuff that was making me uncomfortable. But so as I looked into his eyes and just said, how are you doing? He started to cry. And it was just so powerful. And that would happen over and over and over with the men that I would see. And I think it was just such just a clear picture of just how dry and thirsty people are to be seen. And it's as simple as just looking deep in their eyes. And I think we all know when a friend says, how are you? We know, is it the kind of friend that we're going to be like, oh, yeah, fine. Or let me tell you what's going on. And there's something about the way that question is asked, the way they engage with you that lets you know you want to know. And you're a safe person to talk to about it. So I just think being aware of how do we communicate that when we are engaging with our kids, with our aging parents, and really taking the time to show them that they matter. And then the I is inquire with questions. And this is, again, that so often we have something in mind that we want to impart to them that we think is our important advice or our wisdom. And before ever opening our mouth with something like that, it's so important to just ask with open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. Or what's that like for you? Or how's that feel? There's so many ways that we can ask an open-ended question that just shows we want to know more. And they don't have to be questions like, well, when did you do this? Or then that, so often we ask with leading questions and it feels like a third degree and it shuts them down. But to just have an easy phrase that feels comfortable to you, that's just tell me more about that. Or what was that like? I just think is so powerful and it invites them, oh, they want to know. And it matters. And they may then ask you, what's it like for you? I think so often the older generation wants to give all their wisdom, but they're not taking the time to sit and listen to the wisdom of that generation because they feel like they have something that is important to share as well. And I think the kind of key with questions is their questions like what and how, not why. I think so often that's not an open-ended question. Why did you do that? And so just kind of being aware of a question that really invites, again, that space we talked about, a question that opens up this space between us to feel safe and open. And that we're genuinely curious. We're not just doing it as a tactic. We really want to know, what is this like for you to be younger, to be older? We're in the middle, kind of really, we don't know what either one feels like in this generation. The S is to stay present. And this is another one of just really kind of being aware of taking the time to pause, to realize that to feel seen and valued and heard means that you have to actually be present, that your mind isn't, pretending to listen or even looking at them, but you're thinking all these 10 more things I need to get done today, because again, they feel that. You might be looking with your eyes, but they know, is this that kind of look that shows they're interested or not? And then T, test your understanding. I think along the way, someone I was talking to at lunch was talking about how so often we might say something and they hear something different, or someone says something to us and we're interpreting it through our own filter, through our own understanding. And so often it's helpful throughout a conversation to just say, let me make sure I'm hearing you right. Is this what you said? Or is this what you meant by that? Or I'm confused. What do you mean by this? And it shows them that you're listening, and it gives them a chance to be like, no, that's not what I meant. And so often something is said, and even maybe when a hurtful comment comes out, to say, let me make sure I heard you right. I think you just said that. Is that what you really meant to say? And sometimes even repeating it back to someone can help them hear it and be like, oh, no, I guess maybe that wasn't the way I wanted to say that. This evaluate the message for hidden feelings. I think this is an important one when we really think about kind of that reactivity that we were talking about before. When someone is coming out as angry and defensive and attacking, most likely there's something going on underneath. And it's probably hurt or embarrassment or insecurity. And so often if we can kind of pause enough to really ask ourselves, what else might be going on underneath their reaction? And to even then kind of ask, like, does that feel scary for you? Or is that upsetting for you? Or when we name a feeling that's different from this anger that's being displayed, sometimes they may not even know because they're just reactive and they're protecting themselves by being angry and attacking back. And to be able to say, I don't know, does that sounds like that might be hard for you, is it? Or whatever it might be. And that allows them a lot of time to pause and be like, yeah. And then you've just moved your connection down from up here in reactivity to here where it's a real honest connection. And the relationship can change so much by just being able to identify those softer, more vulnerable feelings that are almost always hidden under the anger and reactivity. And then the last one is neutralizing your own reactivity. And that's, again, this idea that while we're having conversation, we're constantly checking in with ourselves. What's happening right now? Am I feeling offended? Am I getting defensive? Am I reacting? And if that's the case, if we react and speak out of that, we're going to escalate it. But if we can catch that and recognize it, and if we're able in that moment to take a breath, to get out of our own head and really focus on listening to them. And again, that's the idea. Like, if we're really paying attention to what they're saying, we have to use this part of our brain, so it naturally turns it off. But if we're feeling reactive and in our mind we're rehearsing why we're so upset and what we think, we're staying in this flashing place. And so to kind of catch that and take a breath and be like, wait, what are they saying right now? We have to use this part of our brain to really hear. And so that is a quick way to be able to kind of neutralize ourselves. And if we can't, to be able to take a pause and say, okay, just a minute, I think I need to take a breath. Let's kind of walk away for a minute. Because if you don't, whatever gets said next is going to be a problem. And so that idea of how do we create connection instead of this drama is trying to catch that before we step into it, before we get pulled into this drama, and be able to say, wait, I don't want to say anything that's hurtful right now. Let's just take a minute. I need to kind of get myself together or rethink this. And then, yeah? Thanks, Laura.
When you mentioned about getting up and taking a walk, I've heard in other places that when people get stuck in a conversation, that sometimes physically moving is very helpful in getting you unstuck. Mm-hmm. So it's not only taking a break from that place where you're stuck and maybe reactive, mm-hmm. but it switches something in the brain. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, so one thing that's another way of kind of switching us out of that anxious brain is a practice that I'm going to have us do right now, just for ourselves. So as we're just kind of sitting here, a way that we can become present is to think about our senses. Because if you think about it, there's no way to take in what our senses are experiencing without actually being present to them. So right now, just take a minute and notice, what are 3 things you notice in the room? Just notice them in your own mind. Actually, say 5. This is kind of a reminder for how you do it. You kind of start with thinking about your hand, your 5 senses. You start with seeing. What are 5 things that I can see? And you can do it in the middle of a conversation. Sometimes it's even, okay, I'm going to look at the color of their shirt. I'm going to look at their eyes. It's kind of just pulling yourself into what's happening rather than being in your brain. So kind of just looking around the room, notice things that you can see. And then we say, what are 4 things that I can touch? And even in this, in a relationship, maybe you reach out and touch their knee. Maybe you put your hand on their shoulder. Maybe you use it in a way to create a connection and also a way that you become present. Sometimes it's maybe touching our own heart if wherever we're feeling that reactivity in our own body, to kind of just give ourselves that kind of calming, kind of give us a little hug, whatever we might need to kind of calm ourselves in that moment. And then 3 are, what are 3 things that I can hear? And this, again, if you're in a conversation and you start to notice, what's the tone of their voice? What are the words that they're saying? How's my tone of voice sounding when I'm talking? 2 things that you can smell. And this is a good reminder for taking in that deep breath. So in the middle of the conversation, just take a breath. And that's okay. And sometimes you take a deep breath, they're going to do it too, because that's kind of one of those things that often you model when you see someone else doing it. And then what's one important truth in this moment that I want to remind myself? One important truth or one thing that I can be grateful for. And so a lot of times, if you're doing that in the middle of this conversation that's feeling reactive, and you're like, the important truth is that this is my parent, or this is my child, and they're important to me. Or that I'm grateful that we even have this time that we can be together. whatever it is. And so it just kind of refocuses. And so to answer, when you're getting up and walking, you've got to watch what you're doing. You're feeling a different thing beneath your feet. So it's kind of that same idea that we're pulling ourselves when we're in our anxious brain. We're not really, you probably notice sometimes if you're worried about something and you're driving. I used to drive up the coast to Pepperdine, right along Highway 1. It was this beautiful ocean, but so often I'm thinking about my day and am I going to be late? And finally realized, I'm missing this beautiful scene every morning. And it was a choice to just take it in. And it was just immediately calming. And so just knowing that when we can kind of just be intentional to get outside of our brain and be present, whatever connection is happening is going to be much more real and effective and meaningful to them. But yeah, that's great. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so these are some common traps that we fall into, and we all do all of these. The more we can kind of begin to catch them, we do them without thinking. We do them because it's something we probably watched in our own family, and it's just a pattern. And the more we can begin to kind of catch it, the biggest thing I say of behavior change is hearing it differently, because those unconscious patterns, they happen, and before we know it, we're worked up about something. We don't even know what we've been thinking. So the more we kind of begin to catch, what did I just do? And then bring it into our thinking brain and decide, is that what I wanted to say or do? So this first one, comparing. Somebody is talking, and in our mind we're thinking, well, that wasn't that big of a deal to somebody else, or, well, they had that happen, or I have that happen, and so we're hearing them, but we're comparing to everybody else around them rather than trying to kind of step into their world and hear what it feels like for them. Judging. This happens easily in those political discussions. Somebody's sharing something and our mind is just, oh, that's stupid, or I can't believe they think that, or that's good, or that's bad, or that's wrong, or right. And so just kind of catching, judge not lest you be judged, right? And the generation like, well, why are we being so judged? We're probably judging the other generation and they're judging us back. And that's kind of the way that works. Mind reading. I think this can happen when we don't pause and we don't take the time to be patient, and someone's talking and we want to finish their sentence for them, or we're sure we know where they're going with it, and so we've already got a rebuttal to it, and we haven't let them. You're laughing, Laura, are you? Is this what Scott does? You, okay. So just being aware when we've already kind of got a plan, or I do sometimes. I have one of my sweet daughters who's she's just more thoughtful, and she takes a while to formulate her ideas. And so often I'll kind of jump in and finish her sentence, like, why am I doing that? Her thoughts are wonderful, and why would I presume to know how she wants to end her sentence? Reacting. Again, this idea of reacting rather than responding, and really paying attention to when that reactivity is coming up and realizing if that's coming up, we're not hearing what they're saying. We're filtering it through our emotion, and we're going to miss what their message is. Rehearsing. This can often happen in the argument. Somebody is saying something, and we've already got our rebuttal plan, and we're thinking exactly how we're going to respond to what they said, and we've just checked out from listening to what they're in the middle of saying. All or nothing. I think this often happens when, I think sometimes if you're getting constructive feedback, somebody may say a bunch of positive things, and then there's one negative, and all of a sudden that's all you've heard. The negative has become this big, and the positive was now gone. And so I think often in any conversations, we take one little thing and that becomes what we've reacted to, and so that's the whole conversation, and we've missed really the other things that maybe they were trying to communicate. Conversational narcissism. I don't know if you guys have heard this term. When I was at Pepperdine, this was kind of a term that was going around. And it's the idea that when someone says, oh, my mom is sick. And they say, oh, my mom was sick the other day or last week and blah, 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 blah. Or, oh, I'm so worried I've got this big project coming up at work. Yeah, last week was just terrible for me. I had this. And so it's like sometimes I think we do it well-intentioned. We're trying to connect or make some kind of commonality. But what we've done is we've taken the message and we've just put it on a different track. And now we're talking about ourselves and it's all about us. And we're not paying attention to what it was that they were trying to say. And then this last one, placating. I think as Christians, we are especially bad at this. That idea when someone is sharing something that's really difficult and painful, and we feel uncomfortable by it, and we need to say, oh, I'll pray for you, or oh, it'll be all right, or don't worry, God will take care of it, or we do some kind of a thing that again can be well-meaning, and yet what it has just done is dismissed whatever that person is feeling. And I don't know how often one of our kids came down with type 1 diabetes when she was 13, and I was amazed how many people said to me, well, at least it's not cancer. And I just felt like, okay, but that's still, that does nothing to take away the pain of what this experience is. And I think that at least we want to do that because we're somehow, and I'm going to show a video about that, but we're trying to kind of make it feel better because we're uncomfortable when things feel sad. We're uncomfortable connecting with that. And I think sometimes as Christians, we're uncomfortable that someone has that bad things happen to all of us. And does God allow it? Does he, whatever that is, we get uncomfortable with it. So we just kind of put a pat answer over it to make ourselves feel better. Really, it's not about the other person. And so I think just that awareness. And so this is I just think Brene Brown does a great job of really talking about how to enter into relationships. And if you were here last time, I showed it last time, but I can watch this over and over, and I just feel like there's always something in it that just kind of reminds me again of how to engage in relationships. And I'm trying to, it's going to go.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So what were do you remember what the qualities that she said of empathy were? My husband, who I threw under the bus earlier. Thanks, honey. At least That's a hard one. I don't know. I catch myself saying that all the time, and this video kind of rings in my head because we're trying to be helpful, and yet it is so unhelpful. So yeah, wrong answer. Yeah? Staying out of judgment, yep. It's one of them. That connecting with the emotion, yeah, like we talked about, kind of what's the emotion under it, and not just connecting with it or noticing it, but then communicating it, being able to kind of step into that emotion with somebody. And then the other one was perspective taking. And I think when I think about this one, and there was that picture in the beginning I really didn't talk about of the drama, but that picture of people on opposite sides of a cavern from each other, and yelling with a megaphone, trying to get each other to hear them. And I think so often that's what we're doing in conversation and trying to get someone kind of in a way to come over to our side. We're trying to tell them how it feels. And the communication and creating that space is you walking over to the other side where the person is standing, figuring out how in the world can I get over into their side and feel what it feels like to be there. And if I can't, ask them, how does it feel? Help me understand what this is like for you. That's when communication happens. And the other picture was one person's talking and it's all jarbled and then it's coming into the other person's ear. And again, it's that idea of perspective taking, that when we're hearing someone, we're really trying to hear them and not interpret and filter and all those things that kind of trap us up in communication. Any other comments about that video or anything so far before we move on?
Emotion can be stepping into someone's emotion, if you're doing it over and over and over again, can be very exhausting and depressing. How do you get through that?
It's interesting. I mean, as a therapist, I step into people's emotion all the time, and I think it's we're not wearing the emotion for that person. We're connecting with them. And I think what happens when you do step into that emotion with someone, it is this sacred space. And I think that's where it kind of, it's heavy to hold that, but I think it's connecting. And so in that, there's this kind of richness to it, I think, when we, richness, when we figure out how to do that and when we're not afraid to do that, because then they're not alone and we're not alone either, because we've now made a connection that feels really authentic and meaningful for us. I love this quote by Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's so key when we may not know what to say. We may not fully understand our adolescents, young adults, or our aging parents. And yet the way that we show up for them, the way that we make them feel is what matters more. We can have the most wonderful wisdom. And this is nothing when I was in Doha, as I was leaving and kind of terminating with all the different people I had seen. It was so interesting to me because so often before someone would come, and especially that was in the early years of my doing therapy and maybe a new culture, a new person, or a new issue, and I'm so concerned with, what do I say? Do I have the right advice? Do I do it right? And over, when people were kind of saying their goodbye to me, the most common thing was, I just loved the way it felt when I sat here on this couch. And I saw them in my home, and that may have been part of it, but it was just so meaningful to me to realize so much, all the training, all the whatever I knew matters to a point, but what matters much more is that there was some feeling that they were safe and they were heard and they were valued when they were there in our presence. So I want to kind of just tease this out with the idea of the fruit of the Spirit and all the different ways that we can make this practical. And scripture in Galatians, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, and against such things there is no law. And when we talk about boundaries and the need to kind of create all these rules around it, I really feel like if we really embodied and understood what this was like to enter into our relationships like this, I think so many of those other things do change when we show up like this. And I like the way Pastor Paul had talked about this verse a few weeks ago, where it's not fruits of the Spirit. It's not like, okay, well, I'm great at love, but not so much at the self-control. I can't control what I say or whatever. It's all together. It's a fruit that it needs all of it to really feel like that richness, to really nourish the people that we're with in the way that is intended in this. So I think we all know these words. We've heard the scripture, but I want to just kind of go through one by one and just make it practical. So what does this look like in our relationships? How do we challenge ourselves to show up in these ways in our relationships? So first, love. One thing about love that always I feel like love is used in such a flippant way. And to me, love has to be synonymous with seen and valued and heard. And I can kind of like, well, they're my parent, I have to love them. But are we acting love toward them? Or they're my child? And this phrase that I think I hear all the time, and I'm not judging anyone who's maybe said it, but I love you, but I don't like you right now. And I think what's so tricky about that is that if we really understand love, like is part of it. And it's like, what does love mean? You have to love me, you're my parent, or you're my child, but liking you fills your soul. Like you like my presence, you like to be with me. I think about Jesus with the Zacchaeus, right? And the tree, Zacchaeus. Come down, I want to have dinner with you. Not just let me tell you what you're doing wrong with the way you're taking care of your business, but I want to eat in your home. And how life-giving that is, he wants to spend time with me. And so I think, too, as we're kind of thinking about connections, how do we kind of communicate between the generations, and we as in the middle generation, how do we kind of cultivate that kind of togetherness where we can play games together, which moves on to the next one, joy. What is it to really bring joy into relationship? How do we bring our families together and maybe play a game together? Find a way to laugh together. The other thing that I think, I've always loved this scripture in Zephaniah, that he'll rejoice over you with shouts of joy, or other versions say with singing. And I think about when we had our early grandkids, it's so normal that, maybe we're all sitting around the table and the little one's in the high chair, and whatever they do, all eyes on them. They're so cute, we're laughing, we're trying to get them to respond. And I kind of, as I was watching that, and with my lens of identity development, I'm thinking, what's it like for this little kid to just see all these eyes and faces glowing with delight? How warming to their heart, like, wow, I matter, I'm worth something here. And yet as we get older, and as we have maybe an adolescent that's being challenging, when they show up at home after school, do we emit delight? Do we communicate that I enjoy your presence? Does our face light up, whether not just our kids, our spouses, our aging parents? How do we take that moment that our greeting communicates, I'm delighting in your presence right now? And again, to feel that, create something different within that person when that's the way that they're greeted. I think someone else was sharing with me about humor earlier, of just engaging with her parents in a way that she hadn't with her kids, and realizing when she can use humor with her aging parents, how rich that was and how that changed the dynamic, and kind of being able to transfer that in all our relationships. How do we find that way to bring joy into the relationships? Peace, I like this verse. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. And I think about, do we have homes and environments and safe space that we create peace? That the world, we have a kind of a tradition that we did at birthdays with our kids as they were growing up, and whosever birthday it was, we would all go around the table and share what it was that we loved about them or what was special about them. And I just felt like I wanted, and kind of as they got older and into adolescence, kind of communicated, the world is going to tell you all sorts of things about who you are. And the world is hard. It's troubled. There's going to be a lot out there. But in here, we want to show you who you are. We want to name kind of the heart of who you are. And that's what we're going to keep doing for each other as family. And so I think just being that place that we know the world is hard. We know the generations are having issues. But within our family, let's find a way that we can create peace for each other and not engage in the same kind of rhetoric and arguing that we watch on TV and everywhere else all the time. Patience. And this is one, I think this idea of being still. And in our busy lives, it's so easy to be running to the next thing. And I think especially as our parents age and take longer, it reminds me when they were little and they wanted to get in, I was trying to put them in the car seat and my oldest would be like, self. It was like, I could not touch. She was going to buckle. She was going to do it all. And the patience it took for me to just sit there, okay, because I knew if I fought her, it was just going to take longer. And I think with our aging parents, they need more time, right? We're going on a walk. It's going to take longer. My father, who I told you is 91, he has macular degeneration. He's losing his eyesight, but he loves to play bridge. And so they spent a month with us this summer, and every night we would play bridge with them. And my dad has to use a magnifying glass to look at the cards, but he and my mom have played bridge for 50 years probably. And I know, sometimes we're all like, okay, because he's trying to, and then he puts the heart down and it was supposed to be a diamond. But that patience to just be able to appreciate we're together, we're connecting, we're doing something. We don't have anywhere else to go. Just being able to find that place of patience within us when something is kind of becoming frustrating for us. Kindness. I think this is an important one. And again, not that I'm picking on us as Christians, but I think we have a few kind of inherent traps that we fall into. And I think this idea of nice versus kind. I think we know how we should act, we know how we should be, and we can put that on a lot of times. And I mean, we've been guilty at times where maybe you're in church and you're all being nice and chit-chatting, you get in the car and then the argument breaks out. And it's like, how do we be kind and honest with who we are? And when we show up and we think we've done something so nice and somehow someone didn't respond, likely it didn't feel kind. And so being aware of when we're doing nice things, we're often building internal resentments because it isn't congruent. It's just what we think we should do. And so we're kind of negating or getting in the way of ourselves being able to really find this genuine kindness in the way that we interact with each other. Goodness, this is the one, and I was talking with someone at lunch. I'm sorry, I have so many different conversations, but this idea of, can we believe the good in each other? God created us in his image, and we're good. And I think so often when we engage with people who believe differently or think differently, there's this way of demonizing, well, they must have ill intent. And I think that when we can realize that people can come from two totally different points of view, and they both may have good intent in what they want for the world, for themselves, for each other. And so if we approach people with that idea of assuming good intent, maybe they don't. Obviously there are some people who don't. Susie, I think we were the ones that what we were talking about. But when we approach it that way, we start from a different place, realizing everyone is doing their best. Everybody is working for what feels right and true for them. And when we can approach people like that, it just kind of takes away this out to get you kind of mentality, or they're out to get me mentality. And I think the news is there's one thing I loved when we lived in Doha is there were only a few English news stations, but when you watch them, it's just the news, and it's about all over the world. And here, the news is just, a little bit of news, and then let's argue about it for the next 30 minutes and attack each other about it. And there's just so much of that going on in the world around us. And that's what our kids are being kind of cultured by. And so, again, I think the more that we can somehow help create this value within our families, that we believe in the good in all of us. We have different opinions, we have different ways of doing it, but can we all agree that we're doing our best and that we're well-intentioned? Yes?
I was listening to a Catholic devotional recently, and they were going through the fruit of the Spirit, and I don't know what translation they were using. The scholars here probably know. But when they got to what I expected to hear as goodness, they said generosity. And I really liked that because to me, goodness is sort of, it's sort of undefinable. And I connected with generosity because generosity I recognize and I can aspire to that. And I just mentioned
Yeah, I like that. And even as you say that, I think generosity of spirit. And I think that's that idea, again, when we're talking about what does this space feel like that we're creating between us and someone else, and a generous spirit is open and curious and, and believing that that person has something of value to share. I like that. Thank you. Faithfulness, I think this is the tough one as Christian parents who agonize sometimes over wondering, are our kids going to follow in their faith? And I think faithfulness, it talks about in Hebrew, it's the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We don't know. We don't know how our children are going to make choices in their life. That's faith, right? We don't know the outcome in our life either. And so part of being people of faith is being able to trust God, that held and free kind of way of saying, I can hold and still allow freedom. And I think also being aware that we can share our faith. You know, to pray at the table when people come for dinner, because we do that at our home. It doesn't matter if someone else doesn't. We're not saying you need to pray too. We're just sharing who we are. And I think that's a big difference, that so often we have this need. We must make someone else believe the way we believe. And somehow we feel good and it affirms our belief if we can convince someone else that's how they need to believe. Versus if that's an authentic part of our life, we share that openly, but it's ours to share. It's not the idea of forcing it down someone's throat or convincing someone that's how they also need to believe. Almost always is going to have a opposite effect. So finding that way that faith is just a part of our home and our life, and we convey it with openness, I guess. Gentleness. This is, again, I think that idea of being able to calm down our reactivity when it's happening, because when we're reactive, the adrenaline's flowing. Whatever we say is going to come off with more force than we maybe even intended it. And so just recognizing the power of being gentle. And self-control. And I like this proverb, better to have self-control than to control an army. And so often we're so worried about controlling the behaviors of everyone around us that we're missing out on what do we need to control in ourselves. We get upset when other people are reactive, and yet we're getting reactive. And so really kind of being just mindful of it in a positive way. I think so often the self-control can kind of be viewed more as, don't do bad things, or, don't engage in sin and that kind of stuff, and that kind of thing. Sorry. But I think this idea of finding within ourselves, and this is something that I have really wrestled with. I think the idea that so often we're raised with this idea that it's a value to be selfless. And I just think when you look at that word and what it means, like anything that we put the suffix less with is not a positive. You're careless, helpless, faithless, hopeless. And so when we put less with ourself, why is somehow that a value to be strived for? And so the idea, I like to think of it more as self-full with those same words. If you put careful, hopeful, faithful, helpful, there's a fullness in that. And I think for us to know that who we are, who God designed us to be, that's how we have to show up. We have to show up with the fullness of who we are, not dismissing ourselves, ignoring, whatever kind of stuff's going on within us, but recognizing that God designed us as us. Our families were part of his design. How do we show up in this full sense of ourselves, mature, Paul's not here anymore, but the maturity of ourselves, so that we recognize we're not just this empty vessel trying to find something to make us feel better, but that we're the fullness of who we are in confidence and strength to be able to show up unoffendably in the relationships in our lives. So I think this is a key part. We've all heard this thing that AA uses, but I just think it is powerful when we're thinking about the things in our life. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And as I was thinking about it, I think too often we try to change the things we need to accept, and we're trying to accept the things that need to change. And so I think that's part of it with boundaries, that things that are out of our control, we have to just accept. I cannot control the behavior of the people that I love. That's one of those out of my control. I can accept that I can love them regardless of who they, and not regardless, but because of who they are. And I can desire to know that. And then the opposite is that we accept things that we should change. When we keep doing the same thing over and over, feeling the agony of it, feeling frustrated that it doesn't change, but that's the thing we don't accept, like, oh, it just has to be this way. We decide, no, there's something so disruptive in this to me that I need to find out, how do I change? How do I change myself? How do I step into this relationship in a different way so that it actually can become healthier? And so the wisdom between those two, that's hard. And there's no answers for that. Again, it's that ability to how do we check in with who we are, who God is in us, and how we act in congruent ways. And then this, I just like this. This is a bench that's over outside of La Jolla Elementary. And I walked by this so many times before I paused to actually read it. And I just love, you probably can't see it, but it says, "Come, sit, rest, and know you are loved," from Grandma and Grandpa. And I just think that's kind of, to me, the image that we want to create in our homes, both for our growing children and our aging parents, is sit in our home, rest, be yourself, know that you're loved, and know that this is a safe place for all of us. All right, well, that is my last on that topic. So I want to ask let's do some questions first, and then we'll try to save some time. Let's have some questions to kind of just flesh out what's this look like, and then we'll save some time at the end to just pair up and try to just practice some kind of a conversation that might feel difficult and maybe trying to use some of these ideas. So, any questions first?
First, a comment about strategy. You said in the second section about responding when something hurts by going, ouch, that hurts. I thought that's really a great, honest way to immediately respond.
Yeah.
The other is, we're talking about, family systems and family conversations. And in my church work, I've been a part of conflict resolution and mediation teams. And I was just thinking, particularly in the second section with the drama triangles and the steps and the boundaries, how beneficial that would be for people that are in the family system that is a church. And sometimes we have great family systems that are the church, and sometimes not so great. And I don't know if you've done any work with congregations and in conflict and all, but it's very appropriate and very helpful. Some of the training I've done is probably not get into some of those behaviors when you're going through the different steps, because conflicts are, leveled. It could be a level 1 or a level 3 conflict, and you have to respond differently.
Yeah.
And how you go.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, and bring it into the church family, because I think it is there, and you kind of see wherever there's this underlying conflict that doesn't get talked about, you feel it. It's infectious in a negative way. It begins to kind of make its way through a family or a congregation. So
People don't, if they just let it go by and no boundaries, then all of a sudden you get people doing really bad things to others that they wouldn't do if they were being their best self. And other friends, family members in the church can help them see that.
Yeah, because those resentments and bitterness build. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I want to bring up the fact that I feel that I'm going to go away with this portfolio of ideas, and they're so valuable, and I want them to become a part of me. But to go home and just not talk to somebody about my notes or not look over them, I might lose them. I mean, I definitely would lose them. So I just really value the things like when you said, when the children were little and everybody's fussing over them and they have all this attention, and you were wondering in the development of their self-esteem what was going on in their little brains.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's opportunities that I can make a person feel valued just by them walking in, and my
Yeah.
body language
Yeah.
and my eye contact and my really listening.
Yeah.
Because I've had circumstances where you would say, could I talk with you about something? And the person never even would shut the radio off or
Yeah.
the television. And it's so demeaning. And so there's so many things that way. And so there was an instance that I'll never forget in a parent participation environment where the students would share what they saw going on within themselves and confess to the child development class that I was involved in. So this one mother, she had a toddler and a brand new baby, and the toddler was so needy and always sucking its thumb and coming up and crying, and she's trying to nurse this baby, and she confessed that she just felt, oh, you again? And see, that goes on subconsciously a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, the main thing is identifying it in yourself.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I just thank you for all the valuable concepts that I'm going to reread and try and make part of
Good.
my life.
Good, thank you. And I love that idea. Like, we can't do all of it, but we can do one thing. You know, and if you kind of choose whatever one thing kind of stood out to you the most, and decide, okay, how do I begin to implement that one thing? And then it grows from there. So thank you.
And maybe some of the ideas will help, like with the family dinner where everybody's kind of given up on saying anything. And how you could maybe turn it around
Yeah.
from some of these
Yeah.
great concepts.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with the holidays coming up, you know, with Thanksgiving, what are we thankful for? You know, kind of being creative and stepping in. And I think a lot of times, Leanne can tell you, you know, it's like, oh, mom's going to ask one of her questions, you know, but if I don't, sometimes they'll bring it up, you know, and so I think it is kind of that courage, like, I'm going to step in because this is what feels congruent. This is what feels right for me, and I hope that they'll participate or get something out of it. The thing, when you were saying too about the look, I think about so often when we had toddlers who wanted your attention. It's like, you know, mommy, 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 look, 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 look. And the more we ignore, they get louder and louder and louder, and it escalates. And so often all it took was being like, look at you turned a circle, that's awesome. And then they're like happy and they run off, you know? And so it is just sometimes so simple. It's just, look at you. I love seeing you today. I'm glad I get to be with you. So thank you for sharing that.
Something that I really enjoyed hearing from my married friend was that she and her husband sometimes they would get so rattled in their discussion, and then they would, one of them would say, let's take a break from this. Let's put this on the back burner for now. And let's take a walk and go to the park and go to a movie. And we will come back to this. But right now we're not making any headway.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say anything that I'm going to regret.
Yeah,
and,
that's perfect.
And I need some perspective. I mean, and I thought that was brilliant because sometimes I want resolution and I want it now.
Yeah.
And that person who's maybe needing space, I feel like they're just cutting me off. And I want to pursue and have resolution, and it just makes them withdraw even more.
Right.
So being aware of what and asking for it.
Yeah.
And hearing about how other people deal with that. Part of the reason that I don't do anything different is because I only do what I know.
We don't know anything different.
And so when you say, it sounds like this, and give examples of what people say, it's giving me a language to
Good.
use.
Yeah.
And I also was thinking about when you mentioned about identifying emotion and how so few of us have language, in our own language, to express what emotions are. And I
Yeah.
think Brene Brown's
The
work,
Atlas of the Heart.
yeah, and I forgot what it's called. It's
Atlas of the Heart. I think she names like
Atlas of
60
the
some
Heart.
emotions.
And
Yeah.
she said that was the hardest book for her to write, and she made herself very vulnerable in sharing personal stories, but it really helps get a handle on vocabulary and a more precise way of identifying
yeah.
feelings.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Helping to, it's hard to identify it in others if we haven't identified it in ourselves. And I have kind of a practice when I was at Fuller, had a difficult professor for me who, I don't know what it was, but we just had an issue and I just felt demeaned and disrespected. And I would be so angry, and we used to have to carpool together when we would drive. And so I'd be aware of being so angry, but then really what I was like, it's really that I'm just humiliated. I'm embarrassed about how he treats me. I feel diminished and demeaned. And when I could say that, it quieted it all down. But if I was just mad and I wanted to vent and he's so terrible, it's like unless we name it with the right emotion, it continues to swirl. If we just call it all anger and it's really fear and embarrassment, we don't release it. And so it is so important to be able to name the emotions accurately. And it's like, and it was kind of the same thing with the little toddler. It's like, okay, yeah, that was embarrassing. That was humiliating. Okay, I can deal with it. I can move on, and I could kind of let it go. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you.
Just a comment talking about Brene and talking about vulnerability. And one of the things that I think I resonate so much with her is, and when I was first started reading her and listening to her, is relationally, which is so much of what we're talking about, right? Is to be in a real relationship, you have to be vulnerable. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable with someone else, and then that gives you kind of a permission, I guess, too, to be in a relationship. But when we're talking about certain conversations, like whether it be politics or difficult conversations, and trying where you might disagree, trying to remember if you've been vulnerable with that person, you see that person more, you understand that person more, you love that person, you know, if you're talking about family or good friends, and again, trying to see past that. But that vulnerability piece, again, is just so huge.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've all probably been parts of Bible studies or groups where everybody's kind of just giving the right answers and saying what they should say. And then someone says, but you know how I really feel is such and such. And then all of a sudden, everybody goes down, right? Because it's safe. And so we can be real, and it's so refreshing. Or even with a friend, one-on-one, like, fine. And they say something, it's like, me too. And it's refreshing to be able to do that. And it's risky to be vulnerable, but I think, yeah, it's rewarding. And that's where those real connections for sure happen. Yeah, and I think as I'm thinking about kind of those difficult conversations that ramp up maybe about politics or whatever kind of ideologies that are different, even that, if we can go underneath that and share, rather than trying to share our belief or mediate the two different sides, if we can say, oh, it hurts my heart when we talk to each other like this. I wish we could really figure out how to accept that we all believe differently and just love each other. Or, just because that's the most congruent. It's not that I'm frustrated, it's that I'm hurt because I want us to have meaningful relationships. And so I think sometimes just being present in that moment to say, this is how I'm feeling right now, it makes me sad, or I miss you, rather than I'm mad that you're not picking up when I call, just say, hey, I miss you, I was thinking about you. That's a lot different than you're never available when I try and call you, and it's being vulnerable to say, my heart misses you.
There's a commercial that I've watched that I really resonate with, probably in a negative way. These two people are disagreeing about something that says, so one of them throws the challenge thing. I think normally they have this during sports events, right? The commercial, that is. They have it in games. They throw the challenge thing, and then somebody comes over with this little box, and they get to look in and see the instant replay of what actually happened. And I'm thinking, man, I wish I had one of those. There was, then, but I mean, it sounds like what you're describing sounds like, well, it doesn't matter if we do have one of those, or what are the ways to work through that since we don't have the red flag and there isn't an instant replay around.
I was just wondering, Jody, and maybe this is a mea culpa here, so I apologize to do this in front of you, but when those of us that grew up in the fact over feeling household, where fact was what mattered the most, and instant replay, what actually happened mattered more than how anybody felt about what actually happened, and where competition and winning was the most important thing. I think, at 60, I can look back to the 15-year-old and see what transpired. What I'm wondering is when you've got these, and somebody mentioned something earlier, but when you've got these kind of long-term, it's gone to black, it's so black, it's now see you later. Is there, do you in your work, I've never asked this to you, but do you in your work ever put things like that back together? I mean, do people go, where something's just gone bad, but like you say, the holidays are coming and probably those, the points are going to intersect again in life. Is there a way back relationally to something that is just, does that make sense?
To heal those ruptures?
Or to start
kind
a
of?
process of any ideas there?
I mean, again, I think so much of that is it's not the issue. So often it's what were the feelings underneath that. And that's the more vulnerable thing to do. It's easy to argue about the issue where, well, you said this, and no, I know I heard it. That's the way you said it, or that's what you meant. And I think that's one of the things in perspective taking. It's recognizing that your truth is your truth. And I think so often parents can, they're having trouble with their adolescent because they're saying, well, you didn't ever support me in my sports, for example. And the parents are like, we were at every single sports. Maybe there was one time they missed it. Well, maybe that one time is what felt really painful. And so for whatever reason, true or not, their perspective is somehow I didn't feel supportive. And so rather than arguing about, well, I was there most of the time, why don't you appreciate that? Being like, I'm sorry that felt hurtful. I'm sorry I missed that one, or I'm sorry that was like that. And so us owning an apology for a perspective that our kids have, it doesn't matter. Our truth can be our truth. We can feel like I did my best as a parent, but I can still acknowledge. I had one of my daughters shared that she felt somehow judged in certain ways. And I'm like, I think you're the most amazing ever. Like, I wish I was like you. But her truth was that somehow something I had done or said felt hurtful to her. And so rather than defending myself, to be able to say, I'm so sorry that was hurtful. Is that something I'm still doing, or can you help me learn to do that differently? And then it's all done. But so often we engage with, well, let's have it out. Who's really right? And the truth is, we both have our perspectives, and they're both right. So who can be the more mature one to say, I hear that is true for you, and I'm sorry.
So we don't need the challenge flag.
No, I don't think so. We don't need the instant replay. We'd probably be more embarrassed to see ourselves in an instant replay.
I remember trying to, a friend who was going through a very bad time, and I was trying to be supportive, and this meant hours and hours and hours of listening when I was trying my best to keep both eyes open and, to the wee hours of the night. Weeks of this. And then when she finally said to me, I need to talk to you about something, I said, what? And she said, I just feel like you're not there for me. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing because I felt like God broke in at that moment, and out of my mouth came, I am so sorry that you think that I could relieve your pain some way, that I haven't been doing, that I would withhold that from you. And it was just, it was amazing. I realized she's speaking out of the depth of her pain.
Her pain, yeah.
And you're talking about perspective, but that is not my natural
Yeah,
reaction.
yeah.
But when we can do that, it that's why I
We
think about
maintain.
the Holy Spirit is the spirit of truth. Because we all see through the lenses of our own experience, and how can we make a judgment? How can we?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to be sincerely interested in the perspective of the other person,
Yeah.
but to be able to let go of that, I am not enough, I cannot do enough, but I've done everything that I know is
Yeah,
humanly possible.
yeah.
But to see that as the depth of another person,
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
that's really what it means to be present for another person. But
Yeah.
it did not come from me.
Yeah,
It was a
that-
supernatural experience.
Yeah, to be unoffendable and to just show up for them. Yeah.
Jody, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful day, and I'm being told to remember to leave these on the table, I guess. Okay, the tags. Thank you all for being here, taking a good portion of your day to join us. And this is it was live streamed. It was recorded, and it's going to be placed, not today, but online for you to see. And so all the different slides will be on there as well. As far as I know, that's the arrangement that I believe. So I will make sure to check with Justin Kent on that, our tech guy. But that's the plan, and because of that, we want you to remember to tell your friends about this, just young and old, and everything in between. Just let them know about this because it's got some important stuff. Yes. Yeah. We have this. Our website for Mental Health Ministries is Sunrise of Hope, and so it won't be there tomorrow yet, but we will get it there, and so keep a lookout for it. Yes. I'm not sure if last year's is on there or not, but that's where it's supposed to have been. Yes. Hey, just one other thing related to this is Jody was talking. Yesterday morning, I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone, and he happened to mention this movie he had seen, and he goes, "It's called This Beautiful Fantastic," and it just sounded ungrammatical to me, So last night we just decided to watch a movie, and I said, "Well, Chris told me about this one today, This Beautiful Fantastic," and so okay, let's take a chance. And it's a wonderful movie, and it has some of the themes that we're talking about. It's got a younger person and one person at least that might be kind of middle-aged, and then an older man. And it starts out kind of, there's a lot of feelings that need to be healed, but it's just a blessed movie. It's not a Christian movie as such, but there's a lot of blessing in it. So This Beautiful Fantastic. Amazon Prime, I think it's 2015 it came out, and seems like it takes place somewhere in Great Britain. So it does take place in Great Britain, yes, that's right. All right, well, listen, I'm going to close us in prayer, and again, thank you for being here. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for being here, and for calling us here, and for calling Jody here to be among us this day. Thank you, God, for all of the things that you have shared with us through her, and all of the learning that she has, and the life lessons that she's imparted to us today. God, I pray that we would be able to use these in our own lives, but in such a way, Lord, that enhances our relationships with our family and our friends and even total strangers, Lord. So give us wisdom and remind us that you are with us at all times. And because of that, we needn't fear anything. And so walk beside us, Lord. Guide us in our conversations and create connections, Lord, for us between those we know and love and those we don't know, Lord. Again, thank you for gathering us this day and for Jody. We pray this in Jesus' name, and all God's children said, amen.